at 9 o'clock in the morning. And this is Talking Point Live, coming to you live from the campus of Dixie State University. I timestamped this for a reason, so it kind of gives context, especially in light of all just every week it's a new change, right? And what's going on. So it's important for you to know when it is that we're doing this show, because obviously it's going to go beyond live and be tape delayed for broadcast on the Community Education Channel. My name is Eric Young. I'm here with my co-host,
Jennifer Kohler.
And I also probably today especially ought to say that the views and opinions expressed on Talking Point Live belong exclusively to Jennifer and myself. They don't reflect any policy or any ideas in terms of Dixie State University or the Community Education Channel or the department, in fact, where we teach.
Right.
So,
or our spouses or children.
Or anybody else. I found out last night, though, that my views that I'm going to put out here today are highly reflected by my spouse. We had an interesting conversation last night in terms of whether or not we should be voting.
Right. Well, before we get into some of the things we want to talk about, we do want to mention this coming Wednesday at 11:30. There is, sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce here in St. George, a debate between the three candidates for county commissioner. So Dean Cox, Greg Aldred, and Josh Warburton.
Josh Warburton. Starts at 11:30, goes to 1:30. It is a chamber luncheon that way, so there's a I think chamber members pay a fee for the luncheon, but I believe the general public can go without the lunch. It's at the Hilton Garden Inn.
Right, over near the convention center.
Right, the new Hilton that's been built over there.
Right, so 11:30 next Wednesday. There's nothing that surpasses being with a candidate live. So take advantage of that if you can.
In the flesh, we hope to provide more opportunities for that here.
But if you don't make it, it will be broadcast maybe hopefully before the general election.
If certain technical difficulties are taken care of by then it'll be covered that way for you to see as well online.
Yeah. So what about, I think we talked last week about what makes a good president.
Probably I'll stick with the promo that we did.
Well,
we're talking about what makes a good voter today.
Right.
Which I'm sure is a highly contestable idea there in terms of, because you, in the promo, I called you anti-American, and I'm just playing around with you a little bit.
Right.
But you had indicated that maybe the voter needs to be educated, that there ought to be some kind of maybe a test.
A test?
That way before they could actually
Are
get a
you smart
ballot
enough to vote?
Okay, and what does that mean?
Well, and actually I was saying that to be provocative, but it is something to think about. Well, for example, and I will out myself totally on this. I did print out this year's ballot, and I was so relieved to see there's no judges on it. Because what happens to me when I go into the voting booth, a lot of the time, there's questions on there I don't know the answers to. And for example, I don't know about the judges. I don't know if I should vote, let's keep this judge, or no, we should get rid of that judge. I don't know a lot of times the fine points related to initiatives. So I would consider myself not as well informed as a voter as I should be in order to be exercising this precious right in a responsible manner.
Would your own criteria then prevent you from voting?
It doesn't prevent me from voting, but I'm wondering, so anyway, what do you do when you're faced, or are you ever faced with that dilemma that when you get into the voting booth, you feel clueless?
Well, first off, I believe it's done on a county level, if not the state level. There's a voter's pamphlet that's printed out that gives you all of the candidates, gives you positions, gives you key propositions that are out there as well.
Have you seen that for this year
I
yet?
have not, but with my commute back and forth between here and Salt Lake City, I really haven't been into the community or even in my mailbox to see if I've received anything that way. But I do know that resource is out there, either printed and delivered to you in the mail or online. You certainly can go through and become more educated before you ever get into that voting booth.
Okay, great.
Right?
Great. And then what about if you still don't know? What do? You have a technique for dealing with it?
Well, we're hoping that maybe we're defaulting to some critical process, at least to be able to break it down, to unpack whatever that issue might be.
Well, so maybe would you default probably to a party affiliation?
Well, most defaults are going right back to some type of, I'm a Republican, so I'm just going to vote straight Republican ticket. And that way I don't have to be educated in terms of what's really going on.
Right, because I know what they stand for.
The Democratic side.
I know what my party...
No.
No, we don't?
We don't know what they stand for.
Oh, but I thought that was the whole idea.
We have to stop making that assumption anymore.
Okay.
Especially as voters, we can't keep assuming that, if they're Republican, then they represent my values, or if they're Democrat, they represent my values. we're seeing that proven out every debate now
Okay.
between our presidential candidates.
Okay.
I'm sure most of my Republican friends would argue that Donald Trump does not represent who they are.
Maybe he's not actually a Republican.
Right.
Right. And actually, I've seen some research that would suggest that he's actually not. He's running as the Republican nominee, but he doesn't talk about the Republican platform,
Right.
and his agenda doesn't seem to be addressing some of the major Republican platform issues. Yeah.
So perhaps the first criteria of a good voter is that they don't make that assumption that
Okay.
if they vote their party ticket, that means that that's entirely in line with their own beliefs and values in terms of what that individual's bringing to the office. Even with Trump's very controversial remarks that were released last Friday,
Okay.
that stem back to 2005, I believe, and we have this exodus of Republicans backing off from
Right.
from supporting Trump.
Right.
There ought to be some indication within that. Even the Deseret News came out with an editorial saying we cannot, in good conscience, they haven't in 80 years of publication, have said anything positive or negative about a presidential candidate
As a part of their policy.
as a part of their policy, right?
Okay.
And yet this latest, the Sunday's editorial comes out and says, we can't back up this horse.
We can't be quiet now.
No, we can't. And that ought to be an indication. Well, those who remain in support of Trump, just by virtue of the Republican ticket, and those who have gone away, that ought to be an indication that maybe their values are also inconsistent with each other within the party.
Okay.
And I think it's kind of ridiculous, actually, an assumption to go through and think that, well, we're all going to vote the same way since we belong to the same party. That's a gross assumption to begin with.
Right.
But here we're to a point of splitting hairs on certain issues, especially as it comes to women's rights, how we're treating women, how women are being viewed
Okay.
socially on very base levels.
Okay.
Those who still decide to back up Trump after he's admitted to sexual assault. I'm
Well,
of the
yeah,
opinion
yeah.
these people don't have women who are close to them who've been sexually assaulted.
You know what? I that might be true, but one thing that occurs to me, and I think it's germane to what you just said. I got an email yesterday from the chair of the Utah Republican Party, James Evans, and the gist of it was, we need to vote for the Republican candidate because the other candidate's a bad guy, and tried to paint the Republican candidate in the best possible light as a reformer.
What light
Okay.
is left?
Well, and here's the thing. I'm like, so what you're saying is leadership. You want me to vote for one bad choice because there's another bad choice. So I have to pick the lesser evil. And I hate that as far as leadership goes. I basically responded by saying that's a ridiculous message to send to me.
You emailed them back and
I
said
did.
that's
I
ridiculous.
used the word ridiculous message. I didn't attack that person's character and say you're a
Right.
ridiculous person.
Right. Okay.
But I did say it was a ridiculous message. So, and that's how that was my gut response. And I'm finding myself surprised at doing that but that's just a small example of the state we're in, the condition that we're in at the moment politically.
Well, what does that kind of rhetorical coercion or persuasion, I guess, at the least, what does that do, coming from a local leader in
Yeah.
the GOP, to put that kind of pressure on voters? What does that do to the critical process on the voters' part?
You mean the
trying to
critical
determine-
thinking, the
Yeah.
critical thinking process? Well, it implies, you know what? Don't think about it too much. Don't analyze the situation too much. Just go with the party line. So suspend your critical thinking
that
for a minute here.
becomes
Yeah,
problematic.
ignore what your gut tells you, ignore what your brain tells you. Just follow us along because we can't vote for the other people. Of course, there are 10 presidential candidates. We only talk about 2 of them most of the time.
And there's one candidate who's making a bigger splash in the state of Utah, Evan McMullen. I read a source this morning. Honestly, it was on my Facebook feed, so I didn't vet it, and I can't give it a whole lot of credibility.
Okay.
But the numbers were interesting. Went through and reported that Evan McMullen's at 23%, according to certain polls in the
Okay.
state of Utah. Hillary is at 24%, and Donald Trump is at 25%. Which is startling considering Utah's very redness
Do
over.
you think that poll was taken before last weekend?
No, I don't. I think it's a relatively recent
Okay,
number there
all right.
because certainly the gaffes and that circus that we called the debate on Sunday
Yeah.
went through, and I think really kind of catapulted McMullen into
The 23% position, if you will.
right.
Okay.
We're not going to see that nationally. I hate to
Okay.
put a wet towel
Right.
over the whole thing, but I
Right.
don't think we're going to see that nationally. Witness Mitt Romney in his
Yeah.
attempt with his background.
Yeah.
They share similar backgrounds in terms of their faith. McMullen
Okay.
is a Latter-day Saint, like Romney is.
BYU graduate.
A BYU graduate. He's works for the Central Intelligence Agency and has some experience on Capitol Hill. Very ambitious. The guy appears to be very much in line with Republican ideas, morals, values, that kind of thing. But the country's not ready to, I think, elect somebody who is a Latter-day Saint.
Well, okay, so this is interesting because as a Utah resident, and now he's on our radar system, a vote is an expression of a point of view. Anytime you cast a vote, you're saying, I agree or I disagree, I support, I don't support. So what would a
Where
vote...
does that expression go?
Right, well, okay, so well, Utah will be exposed for its percentages when the votes are
Sure,
taken.
right, okay.
So what would that mean?
collectively
What would that mean for the state of Utah as a population if it shook out that way, or if?
Well, what do you
this-
mean if
yeah.
Utah went through as a population and got behind McMullen?
Yeah, for example, or behind Hillary, or behind Donald Trump. What does that say about us as a state?
Okay.
Population.
Well, I can't give you one answer to that
Right.
in terms of all three of those candidates.
Okay.
It's my opinion that if McMullen becomes the choice for the state of Utah, then the state decided to go through and examine what was consistent and what was inconsistent with their values, and they voted for McMullen because they found him to be the most consistent with those ideals. If they
Yes.
voted for Hillary, who knows what they're thinking? And if they voted
Yeah.
for Trump, it has to be an adhesion to the Republican Party line.
Right. And there's not much of a Republican Party line left.
There's still some diehards who will not
I know.
let go
Yeah.
until their cold dead fingers are
Yeah.
peeled away
Yes.
from it. But I want
Yeah.
to go back though to
Okay.
something that you said in terms
Okay.
of my vote is an expression of where I'm coming from,
Okay.
right? So in
Okay.
communication we have either a dyadic or small group, or there's the sender receiver. We have this thing going back and
Right.
forth. We express, we get that expression received and interpreted on some level, so we come to some type of shared meaning. But a vote, as we put that out there, and as it goes into the ballot box, and then it becomes, in Utah's case, electronically counted, that expression becomes diluted or lost because, especially if I'm voting Democrat, it's a foregone conclusion that that vote's not really going to count on any level in a red state.
Right.
This election notwithstanding, because now we're seeing much more closer numbers in terms of
Right.
the presidential candidates are
Right,
concerned. So
right.
maybe there's some kind of sway, but on a local level, I sincerely have my doubts that that's going to trickle down into some kind of mix-up between red and blue.
So there's the vote, there's a protest vote, there's abstaining from
There's
voting.
abstaining, yeah.
So those all send messages, do they not?
Yeah, and I've kind of labored over this. You and I have been talking
Yeah.
about this most of the week. Jen and I carry on a conversation over the course of producing the show, leading up to like what we're doing here today, and we try to kind of provoke each other a little bit. And as I've gone through and examined a lot of the evidence around me after Sunday's debate, after Friday's declaration of Donald Trump's videotape and all kinds of things that are going on, I began to think, what would happen if we just didn't vote? And I realized that's a little bit of a bombshell to drop in today's show. But we all have a primary certitude that voting is a responsibility. We live in a nation and we live in a democracy. It's not only our right and privilege to do so, but it's also our duty. But it's the vote that goes through and empowers the levels of corruption that we keep resisting and fighting against every election cycle, as we call for campaign finance reform, as we watch a debate where every time lips are moving, it was lie after lie after lie. So why not disconnect that? Don't vote. If we don't vote, then we don't have incumbents who can go through and go back to those offices. If we don't vote, we don't have a system that remains open to the corruptibility of big PACs and lobbyists and corporations. I realize we lose our freedom in making a choice, but if we happen to do that over 1 or 2 cycles in order to just go through and say, look, as a country, we're not going to put up with the inherent corruption that has now become this democracy.
Well, doesn't no vote automatically become a vote for the incumbent?
That's a good question.
I'm wondering
And
about
I don't
that.
know. I'd have to
Yeah.
go through and
Yeah.
look and see what's going
Yeah.
on with that.
Yeah.
I think it would send more of a clear message, though, that the constituents, the citizens of the United States have had it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think most of us are to that point of jusque-là, as they say in French.
Yeah.
I've had it. So why continue to contribute to a system that is fundamentally broken,
Okay.
if not flawed in terms of the electoral college on the presidential level,
Okay.
that has more consideration for big money than it does for that average voter like you and me, who are voting to have some level of expression on how we think the country should be ran, because there's no consideration given to that expression.
Okay, well, so listening to you talk about this, it makes me feel a little bit overwhelmed and impotent as a citizen. So one thing I would say is, okay, that's all good to consider, how we might go about modifying or drastically restructuring the system. So our power resides more on the local level, right? Because we actually can influence, we have more of an opportunity to influence who our leadership is at a local level. So let's look, for example, at the state of Utah right now. We have 2 candidates. I don't know if we have more than 2 for governor.
For governor, there's just
Right.
2. There's Whiteholz
Okay,
and Herbert.
and Governor Herbert. So, for example, it was interesting. I did a Google search the other day. I put in gubernatorial race, Utah, 2016. And the first 3 pages of Google results, I didn't see Weinholz's name mentioned, even in the little fine print under the heading, which I thought was kind of interesting.
So what you're looking at there is pretty basic and simple. It's search engine optimization. It's the campaign mechanisms anymore of anybody who knows how to run a good campaign in terms of managing how they're represented within the media. And the number 1 representative media right now is the internet. Okay, because that's
Right.
where most of us are going to go through and vet our candidates and see what's going on.
Okay.
So yes, it comes as no surprise that
Right.
all your top hits on a Google search would happen to fall to an incumbent. Weinholz, though, he's got the budget. He's got the means. I'm not understanding
understand
perhaps
he's
why he
put
doesn't
in-
have the search engine optimization to put his
Right,
name up there.
right,
that
right.
way. Maybe he doesn't want to play that game.
Well, it is interesting because I think he's contributed a significant amount of his own personal finances into the race as well. But it is curious that he hasn't figured out how to overcome that, which I think is a deficit in his campaign if he doesn't show up on the first 3 pages of hits. And you know who did show up was Johnson, the fellow, the primary opponent.
Really? For
What's his name? Jonathan Johnson.
who doesn't know what Aleppo is?
Well, no, Jonathan Johnson. Remember we had the Utah primary.
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Isn't it Jonathan Johnson?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't
Well,
even
see, you've
pretend to know.
forgotten.
Yeah.
You've forgotten from the spring. But so that primary race in the state of Utah between the 2 Republicans showed up. That's old news
Right.
from last April and May. Okay, that showed up, but Weinholz didn't show up. So that was an interesting thing to me. So.
You had a point, though,
Yeah.
I'm bringing up from a gubernatorial standpoint.
Right.
Locally,
We have more power.
we have more power.
Yes. And what do you think about that claim?
Well, we talked about this the other
Yeah.
day when I said, well, I can't in good conscience cast a vote on the presidential level.
Yeah.
And I went through the ballot and started looking at everything else from gubernatorial on down
Yeah.
to where we're at with our county commissioners. And I've arrived at the same conclusion, to not vote
Oh, really? All the way down the ticket?
all the way down the ticket.
Now, that's interesting because I'm not feeling that same level of discouragement at the local level that you're expressing. So, what if you went to the debate next Wednesday and,
I would
that
like
may-
to
okay,
there to see what's going on.
county
I've got
commissions?
class during that time, and I
Okay.
go through and dismiss things along those
Right.
lines. But I will certainly read up and see
right,
what's happening. I have the same level of distrust in terms of
Wow.
my own suspicions on across the board, not just the Republican side, but the Democrat side, both as they come together. I don't believe in the system anymore.
That's a very discouraging place to be right now.
It is. It's
Yeah.
it's a little darker place.
Yeah.
I have to say, there's a little bit of relief
Okay.
that I've had within the last 12 hours or so.
Okay.
On one hand, not casting a ballot enables me maybe to go through and speak with less of a bias in this context.
Because you're not advocating
Because
for
I'm
anybody.
not advocating one side or the other.
Okay.
On another is I have so much more free time.
Oh my gosh, you're going to get yourself into trouble.
Oh, I
here.
know. I'm sure
Yeah,
the from our 13 viewers, the letters are going to come pouring in
Yeah.
over this. But I can't deny how I feel. I can't deny my experience, my own experience working on government levels, and for the longest time, I've shelved all of my concerns and always given the benefit of the doubt
Right.
as to what's been going on.
Right.
And I just can't do that anymore. And I need to for me to find any kind of consonance again, I have to say I'm not going to contribute to the process.
So let's just say that you're going to do that then, but you're not giving up completely, are you, on the whole process?
I'm not saying I'm never going to vote again.
Right.
I just believe at this point we've reached an apex of corruption across the board, regardless of what level we're talking about in terms of the election is concerned, that I just choose not to participate in. Again, I'll go back. You talked about, well, as a voter, you're discouraged by what I'm saying. You feel impotent. I feel actually a little bit more empowered that if it's ridiculous for me to even consider that perhaps someday this might be a trend statewide or nationwide that we all abstain from voting. I'm a realist, I understand that. But I have a little bit more agreement, a little more conscience just within myself, knowing that I'm not contributing to the fray, to what's going on.
Okay. Well, okay, and just talking about this process of being a citizen and exercising voice and taking really responsibility for the government that we have, okay? So there's the process of vetting candidates and voting.
Do you want to be responsible for the status quo right now?
Well, I want to fulfill a responsibility I have to be a good citizen, and I think that would be described as informing myself and trying to elect people to office that I think are going to make good decisions for the benefit of the community. So, but what I want to say about that is that's only one part of this process of being a good citizen. So there's what happens after they're elected. So who influences, who lobbies the candidates? See, so getting them into office is step one, let's say, or getting them nominated, that whole process. But number two, now they're in office. So now how do I communicate? How do I express my voice to someone who is elected? For example, I've had the experience now of calling our U.S. senators, our U.S. representatives back in Washington, D.C., and speaking with their interns on the phone, and I'm happy to say they're local Utah students.
Some are right from
one
Dixie
that
State
I've gotten
University.
acquainted with, right, and we have our new Institute of Politics here. We're going to be placing interns in Washington and at the Utah State Legislature and being engaged as a university in this process of developing citizens and developing voice. So we have to ask ourselves, after they're in office, what do we do about expressing our voice as citizens? How do we communicate? Do we inform ourselves about an issue so that we can make an articulate request of an official, or do we even know where their offices are located, locally, for example?
How connected do citizens remain to any given issue after the elections, though?
Exactly.
We all go back
Exactly.
to our daily routines, and it's
Right.
not that we're bad citizens in that
Right.
respect. And I also want to defend the responsible part here
Okay.
in terms of the stand that I'm taking.
Okay.
I'll come back to that.
Okay.
But we're not well informed, especially locally or on a state level. We still have certain biases that play into how the press covers what's happening, or the constituents are blinded by certain actions of closed-door meetings that are happening right up here on our own hill in that
Okay.
respect. So we're not privy to the actual governance that's happening on a local level.
So there's not enough transparency.
There's not.
Okay.
Again,
is
it speaks back to my whole protest in a way of saying I'm not going to vote.
Okay.
And not because I'm an irresponsible citizen. I feel it's my responsibility to go through and abstain, so at least I haven't contributed to the perpetuation of the corruption that's going on every level.
Okay, so in this day and age, there's really so much more opportunity for transparency because of technology. So there's really no excuse for not sharing information.
Well, the channels are there, but we're not seeing that transparency.
Right, because we're not demanding it. Okay, so that's part of the problem is, as citizens, you know, I have to say ultimately we get the government we deserve. We get the leaders that we deserve, and we get the policies that we demand. So I think we need to look more at ourselves. We've been looking at the candidates a lot and vetting the candidates, scrutinizing their every tweet, as it were. But I think we need to look back at ourselves. You know, how are we processing the information, and what's our decision making? And I want to say the third element that I think comes into the government that we have and our responsibility is you can make laws, we can elect people to make laws, but if the executive branch of the government at the state level, at the county level, at the national level, if they don't enforce the laws and regulations that are passed by our elected representatives, if they select who they're going to enforce, who they're going to cite for a violation, and how much they're going to fine them.
Or if they're going to allow third parties to go through and dictate to them who they're going to.
Okay, then that's a whole nother area of power, of the power balance, right? That as citizens we need to be.
That's a whole part of power that doesn't belong to the citizens anymore.
Well, we can make more demands, I think, on the executive branch and on the legislative branch to make enforcement.
What's going to happen on the executive level? We've seen what happened in certain racist escalations in terms of Barack Obama's presidency. Over the past 8 years, we've had this magnification of racism in the United States. What's going to happen to feminism if Hillary becomes the president?
Okay, I did respond to you when you were talking about racism being a problem by telling you that I think it's a symptom, the expressions we've been having of the, like for example, Black Lives Matter and some of the protest movement and some of the outrage. I think that's a symptom of moving forward, not a symptom of moving backward, because now people are feeling more empowered, and rightfully so, to be treated as full citizens. I think that's a movement forward. And for women, we might have the very same, like you're saying, backlashes. Again, I will say that as people demand their rights, people that have not had rights demand them, there's always backlash.
Well, I agree with the backlash point, but I disagree with the concept that there's some level of progress happening.
Just just the fact that you think you have a right is a sign of progress, when before you didn't think you had the right to be president.
Oh, I think there was more optimism about equal rights back in the 60s than we have now.
Naive, maybe naive.
No.
In the sense that, we've won it all, it's all, no one ever thought it was over then.
Well, a lot of people thought it was over at that point.
Yeah.
But just by the presence of the Black Lives Matter movement, to me is indication enough that we haven't made any ground on this whatsoever.
I beg to differ.
If you look at incarceration rates as well in terms of black males, that prison industrial complex this country is founded upon, not founded upon, but that's becoming, I'm losing
endemic,
my train of thought here, but it is becoming endemic.
Yeah.
There's systemic racism happening in terms of law enforcement, the whole tribal idea. Now, but my question, I want to get away from the whole race idea and get into the whole feminist idea. Do we anticipate that same pushback with women?
Well, it'll be
interesting.
Or even
if Trump is elected,
Yeah.
because we know that he also has an anti-feminist agenda. Not also, but he has an anti-feminist agenda where the country might adopt an anti-feminist agenda with Hillary.
I think assigning an agenda to him is a little flattering in his case. I think he's just being himself, and I don't think he has an agenda related to that, except a personal ego agenda, right? But not as far as a national one, but that's speculation for sure.
Well, and we've completely wrapped up our show at this point. If you've got something to say, want to contribute back to this, you're welcome to hit our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/TalkingPointLive, and we'd be happy to hear what you have to say. We'll be back next week with another show.
Yes.
maybe we'll just continue this conversation. Who
Okay.
knows?
All right.
Thank you for joining us. This was Talking Point Live. I'm Eric Young.
And I'm Jennifer Kohler.
We'll see you.